welcome everyone to another episode of Common Sense with Dr. Ben Carson. I am Ben Carson, and I hope we're going to share some real common sense with you today. This production is part of the American Cornerstone Institute. It's a nonprofit organization that I founded a couple of years ago, along with some extremely capable people from the previous administration. And lately I've been struck by the ideological discourse surrounding public education. And what are we trying to teach our children? Are we trying to teach them the basics, the things that they need to know to be successful in society? Or are we trying to indoctrinate them? Some of you have probably heard the story recently that came out of Baltimore, where they looked at 23 public schools and 2,000 students to find how many were proficient at the appropriate grade level in math. Guess how many? Zero. That is an absolute disaster. And yet, I suspect those kids could probably tell you what pronoun you're supposed to use, or they might be involved in critical race theory and telling you about the things that supposedly happened or didn't happen and why we're all either oppressors or victims. You know, is this stuff really helping us as a nation? Is it helping us to be able to compete globally throughout the world? These are things I think we really need to talk about. But that's one of the reasons that we created the Little Patriots learning program. It provides our young people and their educators, be they parents, grandparents, other caring adults, teachers, provides them with the background, non-ideological background. What were the ideals that were involved in the founding of our country? And we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, but there's a lot more good than there is bad and ugly. And a nation cannot long survive if its people don't appreciate it, if they don't feel an attachment to it, if they don't feel patriotic toward it. And those who want to destroy the country, the best thing that they can do is create a division between the people and the nation. So that is a division that doesn't need to be there, that shouldn't be there, and is only there because of the way that things are being manipulated by those who have nefarious purposes. So, Little Patriots is not ideological. In fact, we really need to move ideology out of teaching for our children. And it was Benjamin Franklin who, after the last Constitutional Convention, was asked, "Sir, what do we have? A monarchy or a republic?" And he said, "A republic, if you can keep it." Our educational system has a lot to do with whether we're going to be able to keep it. And today, we have a fascinating guest, a key partner in our Little Patriots program, particularly the StarSpangled Adventures. I'd like to welcome Cheryl Felicia Rhoads, the voice of our very own Liberty Eagle from the StarSpangled Adventure series. Welcome, Cheryl. We're so delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you, Dr. Carson. It's an honor for me to be here with you too.
Well, I'd like to start by asking you, I think you grew up in Illinois. Can
That's
you
right.
tell us a little bit about growing up, college, and your formal training
Sure,
become an actress?
sure. Yeah, I wanted to be an actress since I was 4 years old. I saw a movie with Susan Hayward called With a Song in My Heart,
Hmm.
and she was doing this story of Jane Froman, I believe it was, who was a singer during the 1940s. And I was a little kid watching this movie, and she had been in a plane accident where she hurt her legs, but then she was going and entertaining the troops.
Hmm.
And I liked the idea that you could use your talent to help others, to serve others and help them when they're going through their challenges. So I got into children's theater, the Theater of Western Springs in Illinois. That's the town I was from. My parents were both very supportive of me doing these things. And then in high school, I was in all the different plays. And then I wound up going to the University of Iowa in Iowa City, and I was a theater major there. And then when I graduated from college, I came back to Chicago, and I was in the Second City comedy troupe, and I did some plays around there before I became half of a comedy team called The Fine Line, where we did relationship humor and all sorts of things. And the actor McLean Stevenson, who starred
Mhm.
on the show MASH, he saw us and brought us out to Hollywood. So that's the short version.
Well, you worked for 20 years in Hollywood as a professional actress, a comedy
Right.
coach, assistant voice casting agent, a
Hmm.
voiceover artist, director and producer of comedy shows. Received a
Hmm.
lot of recognition for coaching class. Of note, you're known to thousands of people for your starring role in Mother Goose
That's
in the
right.
1990 show, The Mother Goose Video Treasury, a very popular musical
Right.
nursery rhyme show with puppets and live actors.
Right.
What was that like, and how
Oh,
did
it
you
was
get involved?
great. That actually started in the late 1980s and then went through the 90s. It's funny now that I'm playing Liberty the Eagle, and I was Mother Goose before. You were talking about pronouns earlier, and sometimes I've, to just give some of my friends on that side of the situation, I'll sign it Mother Goose, Liberty the Eagle, Mother Goose, birds, as but it was wonderful, and the people who produced it were just terrific people to work with. They had done Winnie the Pooh, the television show on the Disney Channel, and so then they decided they wanted to do Mother Goose. And initially, again, this is 35 years ago. They thought that I was too young at first to play Mother Goose. And I said, "Well, you're talking grandmother Goose. Most of my friends have kids, that are the age that we're targeting." And then they realized that. But it was wonderful. I got to work. The Mouseketeer who was Sharon. Was one of the characters. We had various Disney people working with us, and although it was not a Disney production, it was called Left Coast production. Left Coast because of California. But it was a lot of fun. And as I said, along with having played Mother Goose and now Liberty the Eagle, around the same time, I was then cast in a TV show with Ben Affleck called Against the Grain. So I said, Bens and birds seem to be a recurring theme in my life.
That's very interesting. Now, uh, you had a great career as an actress in Hollywood. You obviously were involved in several network TV programs. What were some of the programs that you were involved with?
Well, when my comedy partner and I went out to LA, we worked first on the Motown Review with Smokey Robinson. And so we had been seen there, and I was the only woman writer on that show. And Arsenio Hall was a writer, Paul Mooney, who wrote for Richard Pryor. But I was always the one doing all of course, TV was different then. You had censorship, but I was always going for family friendly stuff anyway, because it was the idea that you could be, funny and that everybody could see it. Because when I was growing up, the Dick Van Dyke Show and Andy Griffith and those, and Mary Tyler Moore even were just shows everybody could watch. So I was a writer and regular. We did sketches there all the time, and I got to work with Shaka Khan and Ray Charles. My comedy partner and I did a little comedy bit there. I mean, it was amazing. And the funny thing is, I really didn't know that much about Motown, and I had to really. I was as a kid actress, I was. Focused on my own career and I did musicals and things like that. Where all the rest of my friends knew rock and roll and rhythm blues, they knew all that stuff. So I was like cramming for exams, learning all that I could. But I got to write one of the first music videos for Smokey Robinson in this show. To my mama told me to shop around, so that was great. And so I did. In addition to doing that and Against the Grain and the Motown Review, I guest starred on various shows. One show, Any Day Now, with Annie Potts,
Hmm.
which goes back and forth actually between the 60s and the civil rights movement to what then was the current day in the 90s. But I did Saved by the Bell, which was a
Hmm.
wonderful experience. And so I really was lucky. I'm always telling my acting students today that they have to realize usually only 5% of the Screen Actors Guild is working at any given time.
Yeah.
You know, it's very tough to get in. Um, and so anyway, patience. But I always, I gave a talk one time in LA where I said God is my casting director,
Mm-hmm.
because I said why would God waste you, you know, with your talent? It would be like keeping your best player. You know, we watched the Super Bowl the other night. I'm not sure when this is airing, but you want your best players to be out there. And
Yeah.
when people are talented, when they're so concerned about trying to fit in there, you know, miracles will happen when you least expect them.
Well, it was interesting. They used to have something that appeared at the end of TV programs called the seal of good practice.
Yeah,
And it indicated that there was moral content, and
right.
that disappeared a couple of decades ago.
It
I
did.
don't think there's much attention to that now. And you know, what changes have you seen over the last few decades in terms of attitudes about morality in Hollywood?
Right.
And are they reflecting the culture, or are they trying to create the culture?
Yeah, more create the culture. In the 90s, because I did Mother Goose, I was invited to be on the Parents Television Council along with the late Steve Allen and Pat Boone, who is now wound up doing something for us for Star Spangled Adventures. And I was so honored, you know, to be with all these people. But that time, Allen, who was certainly the king of hip, I mean, he started the Tonight Show and gave, you know, David Letterman and Johnny Carson. I mean, if not always their start, certainly guided them.
Hmm.
But he had this great line where he said, "Look, we are guests in people's homes." And you want to keep that in mind when it's regarding content. And Dr. Gloria Toot was on. It was just an amazing group of people. But at that time, with the wrestling plus other stuff getting edgier all the time,
Hmm.
and in fact, before I left Los Angeles, and and an actor, unless you're an Oscar winner that have put millions away, you're never really in a position to turn down work, but I had to in different cases. You know, my parents were very patriotic. They were different religions. You know, my dad was a Southern Baptist, my mom was Irish Catholic, but my mom always said they had the same values. And so, all along the line, even in college, there were things I wouldn't do. So, when I was out in Hollywood, if something was too edgy, you know, or as my brother said, be blunt about it, vulgar, I wouldn't do it. And so, as I said, the last few months before I moved to the DC area, I turned down 16 jobs. And again, it doesn't make me a saint of any kind. I just couldn't. You know, my mother died back in 2001 and she would be back from the grave to get me. You know, I mean, you know, but she wrote a column called Paragraphing Towards Patriotism. And, you know, as I say, she and my dad were very supportive of the career, but you know, they expected a certain standard on
Yeah.
things, and I did too.
Well, what happened to Disney? I remember as a kid growing up. I mean, Sunday nights, Disney was a must, and it was
Absolutely.
uplifting programming, and you never had to worry about what your kids were looking at. What do you think happened to them?
Well, I'm not entirely sure. As you know, on our Star Spangled Adventures project, we have animators that are working there. I did a couple of projects for Disney. There was a special they did back in the early 90s that was on the history of not only Disney, but NBC. And I worked on this project, and one time I was working on editing things together, and they had me watch a National Geographic episode on the sinking of the Titanic because David Sarnoff, who had been at NBC, had been one of the radio operators that got the distress calls from the Titanic. And then they had me watch Old Yeller, where the boy has to wind up killing his dog. And one of the producers came in and said, "Why are you crying?" I said, "Are you kidding? I've been watching Old Yeller in the Titanic." But to your to point to your question, that history and showing Walt Disney, it was all about being family friendly
Right.
and being something that the whole family could gather together and watch. And so it started to change. Really, there'd be little things, uh, but again, I would notice them maybe about 20 years ago, but it was still pretty on target. But then in the last few years, it's just gone nuts.
And not
And
not only Disney, but almost all of the series. Uh, if you look at a series on Netflix or anything, you
right,
can't get very far before they're pushing the LGBT
that's right,
stuff.
that's
I
right,
mean, you would think that half the population was LGBT or more.
right,
And
right.
I don't have anything against LGBT people,
No,
believe me. But
no,
sometimes I wonder what exactly is the agenda? Why is it being pushed so incredibly hard? And
right.
one of the things that crosses my mind is, you know, the biblical admonitions in both the Old and New Testaments against it. If you can say that it is correct and it is the way that things should be done, then basically you're saying that the Bible's wrong.
Hmm.
And if the Bible is wrong about that, maybe the Bible is wrong about something else and something else. And it's sort of like the camel's nose under the tent.
I've been in theater and film all my life. I've had gay friends all my life, but as you say, very different from adults and, an indoctrination situation. And one thing too, this morning I was reading about pride, all this thing about pride, which is the opposite, of what it says in the Bible. Pride goeth before a fall.
Destruction. Yeah.
And I will different times have actors say, "Well, I have to have pride and everything." You're you're asking for trouble because a lot of us get disrespected or whatever it is. But are you kind? Are you
Yeah.
loving? And so this change, this indoctrination with kids, is a newer thing, and it's because there's some there was a relative of Walt Disney's who was pushing this, not direct, but his brothers, and I don't know how much time we have until the break, but just a little interesting thing about how Disney influenced me positively when
Mm.
I was a little girl. When I was a kid, believe it or not, I used to pretend in my room that I had all the characters from Disney, the villains sitting on one side and the heroes and heroines on the other, and we were in a comedy club. And I would tell jokes to make them laugh. And I had this idea in my head, if I could get everybody laughing together, they wouldn't be so mean, that it would be all get along. And I'm talking, I was a little kid. My mother said, "What are you doing?" And it's just this idea I had. So flash forward later in the 80s, the guy who played the Goose in my Mother Goose tapes was one of the greats in cartoons. His name was Will Ryan. He sadly passed away about a year ago. But Will did all these voices. And we went to this animation festival, and there was an actress there who had played one of the villains for Disney, right from the beginning. And she was a little standoffish to me, and I couldn't understand, because I didn't even know her. So an agent friend of mine told me a few days later. She goes, "Well, she's kind of jealous of you." And I go, "Why?" I was then like in my, like 30. She said, "Well, because you're, young and you're doing all these different things and stuff." So a few days later, we went to another event, and I went and I talked to her again, and I said, "Tell me, what was Walt Disney like? You were there right at the beginning, and you were there for the opening Disneyland. What was that like?" Well, she lit up and started telling me all these great stories, and then I was kidding her on some stuff, and she was laughing, had a wonderful time. So the same casting director the following week said, "What did you say to so and so?" She was saying how funny you were and what a good time you had and everything. And I said, "Oh, that's great." And when I hung up, I all of a sudden realized that my childhood fantasy had come true. I'd made one of the villains laugh, and they were nice to me.
Yeah.
So it's, I'm always seeing the themes in
Yes.
people's lives.
Well, we'll come back in a moment with our fascinating guest, Cheryl Rhoads. We'll be right back. And we're back with more common sense. We have a fascinating guest, Cheryl Felicia Rhoads, a actress, a voice actor, a teacher, and a patriot who exemplifies that you can have a career in acting in Hollywood and still maintain values. And it's such an important concept to keep in mind. We had Kevin Sorbo on the podcast a couple of months ago, and he was talking about, how difficult it is sometimes to be a conservative in Hollywood. Uh, is there a real bias against conservatives, and if so, when did it occur, and why does it exist?
Well, I like to put it this way, and it's funny. I met Kevin at a film festival last year when I told him about StarSpangled Adventures, and he was all in and wanted to be a part of it. And of course, as you know, he's playing the voice of George Washington for us. Um, I'll tell you, I'm a believer. Blessed be the peacemakers, because all my life, I mean, when I was at Second City, my brother was a state senator. That most of the people, were on the opposite side. And I'll tell you, when I was in LA, I just tried to just concentrate on the work at hand. There's prejudices for a bunch of different reasons. They're very eager to please or be on the right side of whatever it is. I mean, my mother used to say my name. It opens some doors and closes others. And because this has been a long time uh, battle for me as far as just trying to keep my own values. I mean, my comedy partner, we were totally on opposite sides politically, but we would use that for comedy. We always were playing opposites. So when I got to LA, and again, it's back to my Disney story, I usually was able to make people laugh, and to get past certain things. And again, it's about the pride thing. Just where there are those now complaining, oh, that they are discriminated against, I don't want people on the conservative side to make that same mistake. That it's how can I be loving, and maybe that conflict, or where the person is, the potential employer, whatever is there, it's an opportunity that you don't know. And I had that happen in 2000. There was an actress who was just terribly upset about Gore v. Bush, all that stuff going on. And I remember, she was just raging on about something to me, and I had tried to be helpful to her in some stuff, at work stuff. And so I made a comment later on. I said, well, I knew that some things about Al Gore's background that had made him, with his father, more of a people pleaser and stuff like that. And that concerned me if we ever went to war in any situation. So a few, and she would, and then I kind of joked around as I do. After September 11th, a couple of weeks later, I was in this coffee shop near Warner Brothers that is a big hangout for a lot of people in the business. This actress came in and she saw me and she went, "Oh my gosh." And she came and she threw her arms around me and hugged me. And she said, "Cheryl, on September 11th, all I could do was think about you." And I said, "Really?" And she said, "No, I remember what you said." And this woman, her family was from Israel and everything. She said, "I thought about what you said." And she said, "And I'm grateful for this situation now." And so the thing is, there is an opportunity for both conservatives and liberals. I loved what you said about the American eagle needs both the left and right wing to fly. And that's the thing. We are people due to our different experiences. As I told you, my dad's parents were the deacons who hired Billy Graham for his first job as a minister. And here he elopes with an Irish Catholic girl, which back in the 1930s, I wasn't born till my parents' 40s. It was a very different situation. So now, with the things happening, and again, I don't Kevin and various people's experience. Absolutely. But sometimes, I just think, okay, think of the book, The Ugly Duckling. He kept looking for the swans. He kept looking for his own group. And again, you never know when one of those people might join you.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And what worries me, quite frankly, is in America we tend to be reactionary
Hmm.
as opposed to planning and strategizing appropriately. Just react to stuff.
Hmm.
And I'm afraid that there's going to be a huge backlash to a lot of the stuff that's going on today. So
Hmm.
that all of a sudden you have a lot of people who are very conservative who are trying to legislate morality. We have to be
Hmm.
careful
That's right.
and recognize that in a society where you have a variety of different thoughts and opinions, the my way or the highway philosophy just doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
All it leads to is more conflict and division. And, this whole concept of hating people, of canceling people who don't agree with you. I mean,
Right.
that is so antithetical to the whole
Absolutely.
concept of America. And, whichever side people are on, you need to
That's right.
realize that that is going to destroy our society.
Yeah.
And, learn how to listen to people. Years ago, you used to hear a lot about tolerance. You don't
Hmm.
hear much about it anymore. But
That,
it's kind of
do
interesting,
you
isn't it?
Do you remember those? I remember these commercials when I was little, where they'd say, "I may not agree with what you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it." And
Right.
I just heard that over and over again. And and again, it goes back to "Blessed be the peacemakers." Doesn't mean you don't stand firm for values. That's very important. And because I have an acting school where you have all different sorts of people, and mine's a private school, so I can do that. It's here in Northern Virginia, but I've had to stand firm for some things. But again, you try to be kind and loving as best as you can, but sometimes you have to be firm too.
Well, how
That
much,
doesn't mean legislating things.
yeah, how much influence or ability does an actor or an actress have on a production in terms of trying to make sure that it has a positive impact on society?
Well, I have a story about that. after after a really lengthy union strike, and I was a member of both Writers Guild and Screen Actors Guild and all that stuff. My agent called me to do a guest starring role on the show Married with Children. Now, I was not a fan of that show. I thought, oh my goodness, what am I going to do here? and because I needed the money, all that stuff. But I just said, I don't know. And my agent said, well, let's look at the script. And I said, okay. So they sent me the script at first, which was very funny. And it was about a woman chasing a little animal dressed up as Ted Bundy. Was the not Ted Bundy, Al Bundy, excuse me, not Ted Bundy, Al Bundy, who was the character. So great. So I get there, and then they changed the whole script. And in this case, they made it a very mean type of script about people with weight issues. Okay. And that was my category at that point. And I read the script and I'm talking to this other actress. I said, oh my gosh. So anyway, the director came over to me and he said, did you get the new script? I said, yeah, I did. And he said, well, what do you think? And I thought, well, he asked me. So I said, had I known it was going to be this, I wouldn't have done it. And everybody gets tense up. I said, but don't worry, I'm a professional. I've also been a staff writer. You have the right to change it at any time. I should have known because the type of show it was and everything. And I said, but I'll be a professional and I'll do my best to do a great job. So he said, okay. So we did the scene and it just fell flat because frankly, it was mean and not funny. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the basic thing is something's supposed to be funny. So all of a sudden they wrapped the day and they said, all right, well, everybody can go home. And this other actress said, well, I said, oh man, I'm probably fired. And she said, well, no, you were very open and you were respectful and all that stuff. So I get home and I'm telling my brother Mark, this is the one who was an Illinois state senator. I said, oh, this happened. And he starts laughing. And I said, what's so funny? And he said, well, they're rewriting the script. And I said, no, 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 Mark, this is Hollywood. They won't rewrite it for actors. He said, oh, trust me, they're rewriting the script. All of a sudden, call waiting comes in. And it's the production studio saying they're sending over a production assistant with a new script. And they had totally changed it to a woman who just couldn't make up her mind. And they had he was a shoe salesman. The shoes kept growing. And it was very funny and fine. So I walk in the next day, and all the writers are kind of glaring at me. And so the actor who played Al Bundy said, so are you happy now? And I said, I would have been professional either way, but they did change it. And I did it with respect, and I gave them a different perspective.
That,
And just even, where it's been anti-religious things, that's what I've tried to do. And if it was something I didn't feel comfortable with, then I didn't do it. And I've told people on the other side sometimes who's gotten very uncomfortable. I said, follow your heart, follow, or as you say, your brain, which is where things are decided, of course. And it's worked for me. And I just want to say one of the things. I know we probably have a break, but when I got to do Star Spangled Adventures, I felt like my whole life had been leading to this because it was about patriotism. In fact, I had a comedian friend in LA who said, I've always thought of you as liberty. He go before he knew about it. Comic Jeff Wayne, he's been on a lot of shows. Anyway, but also the fact that I got to sing, I got to act, that I've been able to give people jobs, people that have stood strong in hard situations. And my brothers and sisters who are all like, a lot older than I am. They were all history majors and stuff, and I've asked them for advice different times. But my parents would be so thrilled, and so I thank you for that.
well, that is wonderful. And we're so glad that you're involved with all of your experiences. It's really growing very rapidly, and people just love it,
Yeah.
and they can't believe that it's free of charge either. Uh,
Yeah, right,
but
right.
we've been able to get wonderful underwriters and people who
Mhm.
really understand the importance of helping to bring our nation together, to taking the indoctrination out, to
Mhm.
educating people. It was John Adams, our second president, who said that our system was designed for an informed and educated populace.
Right.
And what you see right now going on, particularly in a lot of our public schools, is sort of a dumbing down of the populace.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
when people are dumbed down, uh, they don't analyze, they don't think, they just, you just tell them something, they say, oh, okay, okay, that's what they
That's
say,
right.
and that's that's not America.
And no, it isn't. And again, I don't, give me a warning about a break. But I was just going to say, when we were doing the first promo for this, my sister Kathleen is a teacher, and she was talking about, she said, well, John Adams say he was the second president because they're kids who just don't know. I mean, the history has been so neglected on things, and one thing too, what I love about this series, it's something the family can all watch together. And because it's written that adults can enjoy it too, the other neat person in animation that I met many years ago, and this was through my friend Will, was Jay Ward, who created the Rocky and Bullwinkle series. And they said they always wrote for up, so kids could ask an adult what something meant. And there was a commercial where it was Boris Badenoff picketing Rocky the Flying Squirrel. And it says, Rocky the Flying Squirrel, unfair to Local 12.
Yes,
And the
villains,
narrator,
thieves, and scoundrels.
Villains, Thieves, and Scoundrels Union. But I turned to my older brother and I said, what's a local? Because I didn't know what it meant. But Jay Ward said that was the way to go, to get people, to exchange and not dumb down, but to go up, which is why they had a cartoon called The Ruby Yacht of Omar Khayyam at one point. So anyway,
Well, I
being
love your
personal.
perspectives on that. And we'll be right back with some more perspectives from our fascinating guest, Cheryl Rhoads. And we're back with more common sense. And, I want you to make sure, wherever you are, that you go to littlepatriotslearning.com. And particularly make sure that you watch the StarSpangled Adventure series. You'll be vastly entertained. You won't want it to stop. You say, "Oh no, that's the end of it." But not only for kids, but I tell you, it's great for adults too. And you remember the stuff. It's done in such a way that it's quite memorable. And it's so important that we know who we are, know our history, because our history is the basis of our identity, and that's the basis of our beliefs.
Right.
And, that's what makes for a strong society. That's why when ISIS comes in and conquers a place, what do? They destroy the history. They destroy the museums and the libraries. And they don't want people to remember that. That way, those people are easy to mold.
Right.
That's not, again, who we are. And we have to resist these attempts. And I'm so glad that our guest is one who understands that. I have to ask you, uh, what are some of the more fascinating things that happened to you during auditions
Oh, during auditions?
for programs?
Um, Okay. Oh, and just one thing before I just want to do a big shout out to Bob Arvin and Jeff Holder. Jeff Holder writes the scripts, and
Yes.
he and Bob Arvin are the producers, and they just get great sense of humor and amazing in the writing and stuff. But so with auditions, so one of the things too, because they've had me do casting on this, he says, "Because Cheryl, you know everybody," and I do. But one of the things in auditions, I always tell my acting students to think, how can I be of service to people instead of worrying, oh, what are they thinking of me? Just remember that the producers are just as concerned, about making sure they get the right situation going. And so sometimes I have gotten auditions in interesting ways. I had gone to a family wedding in Iowa, and the cousin of the bride was telling me all about how his brother, his name's Dave Johnson, had worked with Spielberg and various people. And anyway, so I sent him a demo tape which had videos of various things I'd been in. But the one time I was talking about being of help to people and this idea of being of service, and he had asked me to meet him for lunch. And so we were talking about this thing, and we were on the same page as Faith and all this stuff. And I said, well, I want to be of help, and I actually recommended some other actors and actresses for what they were doing. So then I get a call from Warner Brothers to come in for this audition. And I thought it was going to be a one-on-one audition with one producer. I walk in there and there are like 40 people in the room. It was executives from NBC, Warner Brothers, these producers are all smiling at me. And I looked around the room and I said, well, hello. And they all started laughing. And it was so funny. There was an actress waiting to come in after me who was somebody I had cast because I'd been a producer on America's Funniest People. I'd been a segment producer and a talent coordinator. And so I just thought she was wonderful. And this show was going to take place in Texas. And I could do a Texas accent, but she really was from Texas and the whole deal. So even though I thought I'd give it a good audition, I thought, oh, well, boy, she's really terrific. And so I had pretty much thought, well, I don't know that this is going to happen. So I had an appointment to go to the next day to an editor with some tapes. And as I'm driving along, I see that he lives on a place called Winona Boulevard. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? My my character's name that I auditioned for was named Winona. Plus one other thing, there was a young man who was very kind to me when I first came to Los Angeles. He worked with George Schlatter, and we were talking about the LGBT issue. Well, this gentleman had AIDS, but we were very good friends, and he, just had been such a supporter of mine. And I remember when I was kind of discouraged and was going to go back from Hollywood after I wasn't doing my comedy team, he said, no, 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 you need to stay here because you have so much to give people. And he was so kind. And he invented a thing called the joke in the box where you push the nose. It had glasses and a nose, and it was very funny. And you'd hear different comedians talk. So anyway, as I drive up to this editor's house, I walk in the door, and this guy has a joke in the box that my friend who had passed away had invented. And I'd seen the Winona Boulevard, and I thought, those are signs for me. And I checked my messages, and I'd gotten the TV series. And so for me, auditioning has always been a question of faith as well.
Mm.
Is this the right project? God, is this what you need me to do? And sometimes when I haven't gotten something, it's been a blessing, and maybe something, always something better came along.
Well, I want to ask you in closing, uh, first of all, what's the most valuable lesson you've learned? And secondly, what words of wisdom do you have, particularly for somebody who might be thinking about an acting career?
I'd like to do it. Well, God's your casting director. That, first of all, I always have my students do something when they start class. Before they act, I ask them to tell me three things they're grateful for. Because I said an attitude of gratitude, it's a cliche saying, but it'll take you far. And I think that there are so many people who have so many wonderful blessings. And it's like I was studying something the Bible today about the Pharisees kept asking Jesus, well, what are you going to show me? And Jesus said, I've already, okay, he wasn't going to be able to convince them. And I said that if you have gratitude, it will take you far, and also to know that if this is something that's calling in your heart, you're supposed to do it. And don't worry about people pleasing with the agent or the producer or whatever, and you'll be led. As a friend of mine in LA once said, she said, Cheryl's the only person I know that can go to a family wedding in Iowa and come back with a TV series. It didn't come that quickly, but one thing led to another, and you never know what's going to open the door. And so I think that's been one of the most valuable lessons, and gratitude, and to have character
Mm.
in things,
Yeah.
because the awards and stuff come and go, and the opportunities. But I tell you, I've been thrilled with the opportunities and even the challenges.
Well, we've had 7 episodes in the Star Spangled Adventures. We're looking forward to many more. Liberty Eagle is such an uplifting character, and we just love the work that you've done over the decades and look forward to a continuing relationship. And may God bless all your future endeavors. And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. God bless you too, Dr. Carson. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
And we'll be right back with my closing thoughts and a prescription for this week. Well, Little Patriots is one of our flagship programs at American Cornerstone. You got to hear a little bit about it today. I hope you will go and visit. This is great stuff, not only for kids, but for adults too. You know, knowing who we are, knowing our history, knowing those incredible foundational pillars that led to such unprecedented success. It's very important for all of us to know that. And Thomas Edison once said, the three great essentials to achieve anything worthwhile are: first, hard work; second, stick-to-itiveness; and third, common sense. And getting perspective is a big part of that. And that's the assignment for this week: gaining perspective, learning about all the ins and outs of what you're dealing with, learning to listen to other people. The next time you're engaged in a conversation, don't just wait for a pause on behalf of the other person so that you can say what you believe, but actually listen to what you're saying. Listen to what they're telling you. You can learn a lot more from people you disagree with than from people who agree with you on everything. And having different ways to look at subjects will tend to make you into a more reasonable and accepting person. You don't have to necessarily agree with everything, but it is good to learn how to be non-judgmental and recognizing that you're not always right, that other people can be right, and that there is a way to work together. That's why we're called the United States of America. So gain that perspective this week. And please subscribe for free to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you don't miss any episodes. We got a lot of episodes now. You can be entertained for a long time and learn a whole lot of stuff. And let us know what you think. Ben at AmericanCornerstone.org. We always love to hear from you. And remember to tell your friends about us, review us, tell your family about us. Get common sense to the point where it is common once again in our country. And remember those cornerstones: faith, liberty, community, and life. See you next week.